all for coming out this afternoon. As you guys are full aware, this is a community master plan. When we say community master plan, many of you all have given your time and your energy for us to be here for 18 months to put together a plan that you guys hopefully are going to work on for many months, many years to come. And this is a partnership. This has been a partnership with the Main Street Marceline group. We formed a steering committee and the city. There was many partners that put dollars and energy and time into this. Missouri Main Street, ourselves, we wrote 2 grants to be able to help fulfill a lot of the commitments of us bringing a panel of experts in on numerous times into Marceline. So there's many of us really looking at this plan and trying to make for sure that whatever we give you all is something that we can all implement. There's ways and there's means. It's not going to be this huge plan that is going to sit on a shelf because there's no way there's means to make it happen. We're going to be here after this 18 months as well. You guys are part of Main Street. Main Street, you're a part of our family. We're going to continue to roll up our sleeves and work this plan together. So we're excited to be here. As we've talked about many times when we've come to this pivotal point, this is not the final, but this is the seeds that you all are planted, and now we're starting to see a little bit of growth. So there's going to be a lot of economic stuff in the beginning of our plan that we have to have all of that information to give you guys a direct plan that's going to work. Some of the stuff you're going to learn, we wish it wasn't that way. Some things you're going to learn and you're going to go, wow, it's not as bad as maybe we thought it was in some of the things. But we have to be real and we got to be honest what we can do here. So again, thank you all very much for being part of this adventure. We're not done. Again, we're just starting to see some sprouts, okay? So first of all, I'd like to introduce Jim Thompson. If you guys haven't met Jim, we must be living underneath a rock because he has met with many, many of you all. So Jim's going to kick us off with his data this morning, this afternoon.
Yay!
Yay!
Oh, no. So the cool part of what I do, I get to do this every day in all of the Midwest. It's a pleasure to be on a team with one of the best Main Street programs in the country, Main Street Missouri Connection. It's cool to see this and then to get to the grassroots of why do we do what we do? It's because we love our towns. When we love our towns, it will always show. But please don't ever forget, you will always get the downtown you deserve. Every time. So as we do this, let our love show. We're volunteer powered. When we show that volunteer power, we can change the world, and it starts in downtown Marceline. So let's run through this quick. I want to shed some light on where you are, but let me set a stage first. Why do we do what we do? It's because downtown is the center of our universe. When your heart goes bad, your body soon follows. Your downtown is the heart of this community. It is where the tax base can be won or lost for every general fund that exists. We've got to figure out how to do those things. It's great incubators. It does reduce sprawl. Sprawl exists in lots of forms. But we've got to make a solid downtown as that destination so people choose. Because every day with my dollars, I choose where they go. And I've been dropping a few here too. When we look at this as collective with all the employment that happens in your Main Street district, one of the largest employers in town. And it supports all of the other major employers in town. Protects your property values. It really contributes to that visitor destination. You have stories that must be told. When we were here last, I think it was in February, we said, I every day am telling towns to make up stories to get people to visit. You don't have to make them up. They're here. And I think it's awesome that we can tell those stories and also tell it in a form that says we're not living in the past. Today, we're proud of 2017, Marceline also. So when I work in a lot of towns, first impressions that I see a lot are close, 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 no bikes, no skateboards, no people. They're made for cars, not for pedestrians. Don't ever forget, cars don't spend money, people do. Make sure that we make our streets where we can get traffic through, but make it traffic calming enough that we're wanting to stop at the stores and drop some money. I wanted to show you a few, if you can read this. Because window displays in a town make a difference. When I see vacant storefronts, all I see is dirty windows and dead flies. And I want every not-for-profit, school, organization to be able to have access to vacant store windows, to wash the windows, to clean them up, present an attractive display that people want to see. That makes downtown a destination. This one's really cool. It was an insurance office, and people want to see these kinds of things. They stop in because it attracts. This was a hardware store that I worked with. It was a True Value store, second generation, been in business over 40 years. In their location, they used their paint chip cards to make a sundress with some help from some of our design team. People stopped in the store and said, I didn't know you sold paint. 40 years plus. And it's interesting how new people move to town. Their habits, where they choose to spend their money, might be the next town over in a big box store and not taking advantage of the stores that are here. Business retention is really cool. And that's how you can really make something happen in your downtown. As you do this, sales happen. I worked with a boutique, a resale boutique, and they were putting items in their windows, and then they complained, Jim, every time we do that, we sell it. Come on. Or put signs up on what you would like to see. I wish I had $1 for every time I heard that you want an evening restaurant. So we have to make that happen. This town, we have the power to make those things happen. Common mistakes communities make. We've got to figure out what people want. Well, it's overwhelming through all the surveys, all the meetings, all the focus groups that we've had. We want a restaurant. It's time to get our very brilliant local heads together and make that happen. People have stepped up and said, you know, I don't want to run one, but I'm willing to help support one, or I want to take my family to one. We have to get together. It needs to be a focus, and I want to hear from you that that happens soon. We can't let all this time pass. We got to make it happen. Focus on what's missing instead of what you have. That's what I'm talking about. You have wonderful stores across the street, great car dealership, the hardware store. Ma Vic's has wonderful breakfast. Sorry they were closed today. I know it's going to be, what, a couple days. But those are great things. So, we are, and I'm going to be able to show you soon, as a community, slowly bleeding to death. We're losing population every year, and we've got to figure out how to stop this disinvestment cycle, turn it around for reinvestment to make this town pop. We're going to do that by working together. We have to create partnerships. And it does not matter who does this stuff. I know we have a Main Street structure, we have an IDA. It really doesn't matter. The city, doesn't matter who does this. We've got to all agree that downtown's important and we're going to make this happen. It doesn't have to be hard. The source we use as our team for this, the data collection that we use is ESRI. It's Environmental Systems Research Institute. It was a privately formed company in 1969. They've been around a long, long time. I've used them consistently, and I trust what they do. More importantly, site locators and developers are all using the same kinds of systems. ESRI is one of the top 2 or 3 in the country, now world, that do this kind of work. And so we want to make sure you have access to the exact same data that they're looking at. So whether you believe this or not, the outside world is saying this is what they know about you. They never have to come here. So what do we use it for? It's really trying to understand what's going on with consumers, people that choose to live here, what industry is really looking for, analyze locations and sites, and then untapped market potential. We'll be able to see all those things in just a second. This is what we use. So it's more of a supply and demand kind of format that we use so that we can really say, what do people want? If they can't get it here, where do they have to go to get it? These are the reports that you have. I have a full set of reports. I'll email them to you both after I get done so you have access to everything. These are the most up-to-date that we have. I just ran these last week. So, here we go. So, population. These are actual populations that happened per census in 2000, 2010. You went from 2,558 to 2233. Those are facts. This is the breakdown of your race and ethnicity. When we do census, they track race. So essentially, you see by the 96.5, you are a very, very white community using their lingo, okay? It doesn't mean that you don't have diversity though, because diversity comes in other forms here. You do have, I'll always share things that surprise me a little bit. You have the lowest percentage of male population that I've ever worked in anywhere, which is neither here nor there, it just is. But it was surprising, okay? This is the median age, 40.3 for the city limits of Marceline. You are consistently in rural Missouri about 10 years younger than all of your other rural communities. They're all approaching 50, okay? Or maybe a little bit more. There's a reason for that, and I'll show you in a second, but you are a very young community.
That's K, by the way.
Population by age. One thing to be careful of, the first 3 bars. These are 5-year increments. So don't compare them directly to all the others. But those of you from the school system, I know you track this. You're trying to figure out who's going to be in pre-K and all the way through. These are the things. You actually have very strong numbers of children. I'm concerned about the other end. You have 85 plus, 2.1%. That again jumps off the page. That's the youngest percentage of any community I've ever ran these reports for. And I don't know why, I can't explain it. You might be able to, but are there facilities, again, in the city limits that capture that audience and give them a place to age in place? Because that's what we all want to do. When you find a place you love, you want to stay there. Average household size, 2.32 is an awesome number. Every occupied household in the city limits has 2.32 people. Actually, really approaching the state average, which is cool. I do this a lot in rural Iowa, and it's not uncommon in small towns to be closer to 2.0 or 2.1. So be really proud of this number. Household income, a shade under 35,000. This is probably my biggest concern for you as a community is why is a working household in the city limits making less than $35,000? Especially with the jobs that are available, okay? So when I do this, I do a 5-minute, 10-minute, and 20-minute drive time to also match the city limits to compare all of those. In the 5-minute drive time, it's 3.2% unemployment rate. 16 years of age and older is what they capture. Are you working or are you not? The city limits is 3.4. The 10-minute drive time is 3.6. The 20-minute drive time is 3.7. You have the lowest unemployment rate of the region. I think the world revolves around Marceline. This is the place to be. So how can we bring other employable adults to this area? And that's housing. Average household size. So median, top, bottom, middle is the median. Average, you add up every household in the city limits of Marceline and you divide that by the quantity. It goes from just under 35 to just over 51. An artificial comparison that I apply to these numbers is when it's greater than a difference of $10,000, you start seeing extremes. Very low income, very high income. Be cautious of that, okay? We want to strengthen the middle class, okay? Healthy communities have all sectors, and that's the concern. When you get to that much of a difference, what's happening? Occupied households by income. This again is another concern. If you add those first two columns together, so a third of your occupied households, if they're vacant, they don't count. But those first two columns, a third of your occupied households make less than $25,000 a year. Okay? Here's what happens with all of your housing units. And this is adjusted to 2017 numbers. In 2000, you had 64% owner-occupied houses. In 2017, it has dropped down to 54.4%. Also a concern, because why would people leave owner-occupied homes? Why would that percentage drop? Your percentage of renter, the middle column, did not increase at that same level. It's like they left town when they were not owners anymore. And then the number also, the last one, 20% of your households in town are vacant. We'll dig deeper into that. Sometimes that's dilapidated homes that can't be lived in, and yes, I did drive by some of those, okay? Others mean that it's just not occupied, it's a snowbird or those kinds of things, or it's for sale or for rent, but 20% is a huge number. How do we peck away at that? The value of owner-occupied homes, so no renter homes are in this, is 72 and a half. The average home value, again, adding up all the homes in town, dividing by that quantity, is approaching 95. My travels in rural America, today in 2017, the median home value is approaching $100,000 everywhere. So I started looking at what's going on in this region, and you're not way, way off, but you're below. Brookfield has a little higher values than you do. They also have higher vacancy rate than you do. So just by saying we're losing everybody to Brookfield is not an excuse, okay? They have their own issues there. Please, if maybe somebody lives there, drive downtown. You think you have problems, they have worse problems, okay? Owner-occupied homes by value, this is not uncommon, but about 75% of your homes are valued less than $100,000. not a real issue. What we want to do is peck away at the homes that are 30% of your occupied homes to try to get them to higher values. How do we do that? Substantial rehab incentive grants. Owner-occupied substantial rehab. So is there a way, and I'm going to send information that we're working on now in rural Iowa because we have the exact same issues that you do. How can we encourage people to improve the value of their own homes? Occupied households. Now, I went back to 2010 because I sometimes want to see what the projections are. Sometimes I want to talk in facts. This is a fact. This is what happened when you did census last. But if you can see, over a third of your occupied homes have one person. And when you add the second person, it's 2/3 of all your occupied homes have one or two people in them. This is when it gets to be a concern, okay? Can they age in place there safely? Are there other opportunities that we should consider for them in the marketplace? And are those homes even available? You know, is there something there that we can work with? Almost half of all your owner-occupied homes have no mortgage. That's good and bad, okay? Working households, it's consistent to have a mortgage. So are these homes livable, or are these the dilapidated homes? There is no mortgage, but there's no hope for that house either, okay? Sometimes the land is the asset, the dilapidated structure is the liability, and it's only an asset if we can figure out how to remove it, okay? Vacant households. So if we go clockwise, you had 181 vacant units, facts, in 2010. 16 of those were for rent, 21 were rented, not occupied, 3 were for sale, 12 of them were actually seasonal, so snowbirds that, I don't know why you'd ever leave here. Snow, does it really get cold here?
Yes.
I mean, I live in the tundra, so this feels like awesome down here. But other vacant, 129 of those 181, they don't know why they're vacant. So they're not for sale, they're not for rent. They can be dilapidated, okay? They can be, my mom's 85. She fell and broke her hip. We put her in the nursing home. As soon as she's better, she thinks she's coming home. 6 kids all said, we don't think so. And so we pay utilities and water and mow the grass and scoop the snow, but mom's not likely to ever be there again, but we're not ready to make a decision. That's what I think a percentage of your homes are. When you drive home tonight, do a 360 in front of your house and look up and down your streets. Are the houses occupied? Can they be occupied? And start that mental list of, I wonder what they're going to do with Jim's mom's house. What is going to happen? Could it be available for rent? Would they ever consider selling it? You're tying up 129 homes that could be some of the best opportunity you have. And if they're dilapidated, we got to figure out how to remove them. And either, what I love is a request for proposal process. If you're going to purchase this and tear it down, how can we help? Don't know yet. But is it just going to be mowed? That gets the lowest scoring from an economic development standpoint. We put a garage on it to put our RV and boat in. That's going to create a little bit of tax base. That's the next higher scoring. We're going to build a mother-in-law's house next to our house, smaller so that my mom can live there. That's a home that you can actually get some value off of. So what's the best economic development input from that? Here's your census for 110 years. It was really, really interesting. when I looked at this, and I look at a lot of these, I start tracking what's happened since 1900. Not every town is slowly drifting away. There are towns that are figuring out, how can we be the center of everywhere, like you can be the center of everywhere. You can get to everything you need from here. There is no reason for people to live somewhere else, okay? Even if you don't find a job here, you could drive easily to a job. So you work where you have to, you live where you choose to. What do we do to make this the community of choice? And you have everything going for you in that. So we have to turn this around, because they're now saying 2017 that your population has lost another 130. They think you're at 2103. And in 2022, they're saying you're going to be right on that edge of 2,000 population. What's the biggest thing I worry about when I work in rural communities in Iowa? And I know it's not true here. Apathy is the #1 issue that I deal with. There are many communities that I'm in that do not care. They're so change averse, they don't want to make the decisions that's going to make us that next generation, that next middle of everywhere kind of town. And I see the spark plugs. I just look around the room, and you guys have the attitudes. It's just, how do we put them together to make sure that we're going in the right direction? Now, numbers. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with retail sales here. So every place that has an NAICS code, places that don't have those, beauticians don't have those. They're not retail, they're service, okay? Chiropractors, those kinds of things. But demand means population of your city limits. What do you spend your money on? And where do you spend your money? So this is how you spend your money. This one is how you spend your money. That's the total retail sales. So a hair over $25 million annually is spent by citizens that live in the city limits of Marceline. For bars and restaurants, you will spend a little over $2 million every year. So that's what you spend your money on. Now we want to talk about where you spend your money. The way we factor that in is we track what happens within your city limits and those same codes. So this is a projection, this is actual. Okay, is everybody with me? So you have actual sales of almost $22 million. That's huge. You guys are doing great stuff. One challenge you have, and everybody knows this, that bars and restaurants are under $1 million. $900,000 in annual sales that happen here. So there is a potential, this is leakage that leaves your town every year of $1.1 million. What was the place? Tall Paul's. We heard about that in several of our visits. And is there a reason why it exists where, tell me the town? Buckland. So I said to a few that if I was reviewing a business plan from Buckland, Missouri, and they said they wanted to do a startup business called Tall Paul's, I would really stutter. Because how do you figure out how to make a destination with that trade area? So how does it work? People drive further to get to that because they are the destination. So as you build competitors in town, you grow your trade area. And that's how this works. More people are willing to come from outside your city limits, inside your city limits, when you have the amenities that they want. I dug deeper and wanted to show you just some detail. I'm just going to buzz through this really quick. But your car dealership across the street, I believe that's the only one, they're really doing great business. They are serving this market. They actually have a little bit of surplus sales. What's dragging this category down a little bit is car parts, and they're not quite meeting that same demand. So I don't know if they're driving to another trade area to get car parts regularly, but it's a great category. You see furniture and home furnishings. There are no sales in the city limits. The hardware stores, it's actually doing very well. It's about $1 million leakage there. Grocery store, and part of this is because they do more things than grocery. So I usually talk about things like Casey's General Store. For every pizza that they sell, it goes on gasoline sales. For every bottle of Coke that you buy in there, it goes on gasoline sales. You can have more than one NAICS code. It's not very common. The other thing that happens is they're always set up the very first time you open your business. So in Centerville, Iowa, not a long ways from here, there was a lady that opened an antique store and had sales. She transitioned into products that she was selling, and it happened to be ladies' fashions. So when we went there, we said, I don't understand why the ladies' sales are so low here. And it was because all of her sales were going into antiques. So nobody ever checks this. It's never confirmed with anybody. So you have to know your own market. You're the local experts. So when somebody says, I like Casey's Pizza, or whatever it is, know that those sales are balanced. So the totals that I showed you first, I'm very confident in. I'm not so confident in these detail, but I think it's important that we use them as baseline, track them, so that we know what's going on. And I'll give you all of these reports. So we can't just sit around and complain, but so I was asked to be on Iowa's Rural Development Council. And there are 7 of us on the leadership team, and it was really cool. And I was very proud to be asked because it wasn't because of my position or anything like that. It's because of my shoe leather in towns, just like yours. I have my ear to the ground, and I'm trying to figure out what it's going to take to make towns like yours better. So they asked me to serve, and we had our first ever, in 2016, rural summit. We weren't able to invite all of the rural towns in Iowa because we have almost all rural towns in Iowa. We don't have the urbans like you guys do here. And what happened is they identified 2 major categories of concern for economic development. Number 1 was housing. Number 2 was workforce development. And you get it, those 2 are tied together forever. Because as you have issues with your housing market, you're going to have issues with workforce development. We are not far from companies moving to where the people are because they have to have the people they need. That's why this is a critical issue for your community to try to figure out how to at least stop this loss of population and then concentrate on growing population. As manufacturers in this region can't hire the people they need, it's going to be a concern. We have to also work on why would anybody live here? Destination development. My wife and I visited this town on vacation last month. I visit towns. I go home and tell her all the cool things that happened from our visit in February, and she was jealous. Came and visited. What's the last question I ask myself before I leave any town I work in is, would I live there? Absolutely. You guys have what people want here. Do you have details that you need to work on? Yes. Check them off. People like me want to live here. My wife, we came down and had a wonderful time. We had planned on visiting the grocery store once and getting our week's groceries and not coming back till we checked out, and we were in town every single day. Some of you saw us, but we had a blast here. But why? Why is the biggest question? Why would somebody want to live here? And you must answer that question. Nationally, we talk a lot about affordable housing. I'm actually frustrated by that, because then we start driving down this path of low to moderate income and all these income-based or are they subsidy-based. And I actually am hoping that towns will really move toward what's the appropriate housing that we need here. So if my mom does want to age in place and needs a safer place to live, are there independent living or assisted living opportunities for her, or are there no vacancies? Okay? Developers don't care what they develop. They just want to make money. Okay? I work with them regularly. Are there ways for us to build a plan around what you need here that would be appropriate housing that people would want to live in? And then can we substantially rehab their existing two-story so that another family with kids in the school want to live and raise their family there? It feels like we have a log jam of people that are in homes that we really like them and they would consider being in other appropriate housing. So we have to figure out what they want. And then, are we getting in our own way? Dilapidated homes are a real challenge for every community. I work with lots and lots of city governments, and the challenge to try to figure out how to remove homes is a budget item. I mean, it's scary sometimes what some of this can cost. But I think for us to figure out how to make some of those happen and think in long term. Don't think about this year, this budget. Think about, can we do 1 or 2 or 3 homes this budget? And then can we do it again next budget? Did we get our return on investment from that? Did those lots sell? Did people move in? It has to be done incrementally. We're trying to take baby steps to get you didn't get this way overnight. So we're trying to figure out what kind of incremental steps can we take. And even if you make the decision to take down 1 dilapidated home this year, that's a step forward. Zeroing in on downtown, I wanted to show you a few statistics that we brought in, a national economist that I know Gayla and Keith have used too, Donovan Ripkema, for Midwest dollars. So this is assuming that an empty store was once a retail store. Keep that in mind. And the lost sales, the lost property tax, the lost advertising, the lost everything that you would do, every single vacant storefront is costing the community about a little over $200,000 every year in lost revenue of some kind. And then we talk about what happens when we have vacant upper stories. If you can get a couple to live in that home that you're charging between $500 and $1,000 a month rent, they're going to spend between $20,000 and $40,000. They're only going to spend it here if they have places that they can spend it at. Now you might say, Jim, $500 to $1,000 is way too much out of our range. Communities, especially smaller towns, are artificially keeping the rents low. The other thing that happens with upper story development is the craze, again, it's moved from urbans to rural as owner-occupied rehabilitation. When I live above a building, I want nicer finishes. I'm doing the granite countertops, and I might even have secured parking in the back. You can get all of those things with upper story development. Where's Gary? We got upstairs. These are awesome upstairs. I want to talk lastly just a couple more things about what's going on with tax assessments. I know you went through a whole process here using your numbers. I want to show you a town that was 1,500 in population in western Iowa, southwest Iowa. They had an occupied building downtown that was, so we reduced it to a square foot. So why does it get more return on investment? It's a zero property line development area. You build right to the sidewalk, okay? All the big box stores, they all have huge parking lots, and those have to be calculated somehow. So we translated everything from square foot to a per acre, because when you live in rural, you understand what acre prices are. We used our state record of $23,500 for production agriculture in northwest Iowa as our indicator. So we're not talking about how much money does it make, we're talking about what's it worth. Now this property was this property. This was the before. It's a double storefront, it's got 5,000 square feet. It was valued at $18,000, 100% vacant. When we calculate that per square foot and translate it into a per acre value, it's $157,000. That was worth to the city of Woodbine, Iowa, okay? Now what happened is it's got 6 apartments upstairs. They get $650 for those, for each apartment. They have a waiting list. They are an hour from Omaha, if you kind of know the area, way over in southwest Iowa. They have an award-winning restaurant on the corner. They have a fitness dance studio on the side, and around back on the alley, they put a handicap accessible unit. It's the only one they have there, so that people could also be there and not have to use all the stairs and everything. But that's the value, $1.7 million for that same parcel. And we helped, we call it, some people say layered financing. I like to call it lasagna financing because everybody understands what that means. We just layered every program we could think of to work with the property owner who had plenty of skin in the game so that we could make that work. Negativity is going to be our enemy. Because if you want to stand up and down the street and say why we can't do this and we can't do that, we could do that all day. I think we have to be about solutions. There are ways to make this town pop. So the keys to success? Not worrying about who gets credit for things, but everybody working on the, how do you sing out of the same hymnal, right? That's what we're talking about, is really all working together. Focus on rebuilding this community, making it the center of everywhere. I hope I never come back here, and I will to visit. I probably won't to work, but I hope I never hear this jealousy for Brookfield anymore. You guys have it here. You guys are the community. They should be jealous of you, and if they're not, they should be. This whole region. Focus on projects that really start creating domino projects. When we build a house on the edge of town, and someone from outside of town moves there, that's really about the end of our economic benefit. But if we could transition some folks to leave their homes now to get into something appropriate so that we could get families to move in and kids to go to school, that creates that domino dropping. And how much more can we build on that? That's the key. I'm done.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Honor up.
Look at that, works perfect. Well, it's a hard act to follow, I think. Good, but except I can't see you because there's bright lights behind
Yeah,
you. But I know you can see Jim, and I hope you can see me. I'm good. Yourself? Do we know where you're going? Okay. I'm Bob Lewis. I'm a principal with a company out of St. Louis called Development Strategies. Our primary consulting services are in planning and economic development. And I, by the way, I'm kind of on the side. I also sit on Gala's board of directors, the Missouri Main Street Connection. Although I'm getting paid for this one.
Yes,
Probably
you
going to put in more effort than I'm getting paid, but that's all of us. Well, that's what you do with Main Streets. And I was asked specifically on this assignment, this is my first visit to Marceline, to look at what are the opportunities for overnight accommodations, lodging, whatever they might be. And I'm going to walk through really just a SWOT analysis, my own, but listening to you all this week, observing, looking at some of the data. We've all talked as well. I'm not going to pretend this is a complete list or even an accurate list, so I'll look for some input. But that's all I'm going to do now. We haven't had time. I haven't had time to really deal with the financial implications, but you're going to see some things in here, and we're going to go on, obviously, the spirit that Jim's talking about. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Start with strengths that we're seeing that can perhaps contribute to the ability to attract and support some amount of overnight lodging, actually of a higher quality than you've got now, but even consistent with some of the newer quality you've been developing here in Marceline. Can we get more people to stay here longer? That's what it amounts to. And you saw some of that in Jim's comments of necessity. While I'm talking a little more microeconomics, he was pretty macro. There's a lot of overlap there. So part of it is, to me, Marceline is Disney, but there's more to that. I know you all don't want it to be just about that. There's a lot of other things, and Jim obviously raised that. But increasing the museum hours to year-round just could be an answer. Now that has to be combined with, I suspect, some good promotion of that, getting more people here, etc., to use the museum more often. If they come more often, though, more of them just might say, where do I stay overnight? And entrepreneurs can be lured to be able to do that, go to downtown on the edge. You've got a lot of special events. You all bragged about them. You've got a lot of special, I think of things like Toon Fest and so forth. You have special gatherings. I don't have to look back all the time. What I call export companies. We met with John Moore this morning, for example. Companies that are employing a lot of people and selling most of their stuff somewhere else and bringing money into the community. Very important. That's what manufacturers do, but it's also what the museum can do. It's also what other attractions can do, or Tall Paul's is doing that wherever Buckland is. He's bringing money in. Short Paul, really, is what I hear, but that's an export industry. You want to support that. One of the questions I had, of course, we had as we spoke with some of the industry people around here is, how many overnight guests can you generate with all the salesmen and other bit? Well, not many. We'll talk about it as we go along. But nevertheless, it's part of that. All of this list is meant to, what's the composition of potential demand for overnight lodging? The airport, can it be exploited more? I don't know much about that. We'll learn some about that as we go. On the supply side, you've already got some new, what I'm calling tourist housing. Circle O is an example, but you've got some other houses that have been, and upstairs that have been turned into transient housing. So it's already a push in that direction just in the last couple of years. I think you've got some great downtown building sites. You're going to hear more about that from the design guys. I'm intrigued. I didn't even know about it. Apparently it's been around a long time. This whole Highway 36, Hannibal, St. Joe kind of thing, 36 by 36, so to speak. Awesome, and that actually is a pretty cool a brochure. I'd love to see more coming out of that, but that's a good thing. A lot of word-of-mouth advertising, and as Jim's already mentioned, committed leadership. You're here today. That needs to be nurtured. Now, weaknesses, the W of SWOT. There's a lot of things to do during the day. You can do it fairly quickly, and then you leave. Maybe back to Kansas City Airport, or Kansas City itself, or onto another community, or to Brookfield where they got more hotels. So it's, okay, can we do, that's a bit of a weakness. Yeah, cool stuff, but there's nothing really to keep me here. Perhaps priority one, as we've been hearing, and Jim said as well, is what do we do about a restaurant? One of the reasons people don't stay, and you all complain about it this too, there's not a really nice place or two in town to do that. That said, you saw some buying power that's not being captured here for this purpose, let alone outside buying power that can be brought in if you had some entrepreneur or two that's really doing the kind of cool restaurant that everybody wants to be at and share some of that. Now, that leads to a phrase I think we heard yesterday, a tendency to fit conditions. So some of the things you're planning out, say, well, we can't plan for overnight events. I mean, I'm overstating that because we don't have overnight accommodations. So we'll just do things that can last for a short period of time, so to speak. So, it's that attitude thing. Let's do a lot of stuff, but can we change that attitude by actually being able to draw things here and then attract and develop an overnight accommodation as well and grow something, get people to stay here longer. Weaknesses, as I said, yeah, you've got the export industries, but they aren't really generating, sounds like to us, the kinds of business overnight stays. I'd love to see that improve. In order to make most lodging facilities succeed, you need weekends, and that's a lot of tourists and stuff, but you've got tons of tourists in the middle of the week. But typically they're also looking at that business market from Sunday night to Thursday night, so that you get more balance during the week and get fuller occupancy. Love to see more of that happen. Not sure quite yet how to do that, but it's right now I call it a weakness. Athletic facilities, if you can do more like amateur sporting events, multiple day would be best. Some of that's hindered by you don't have any place to stay. Some of it's the market's not that big yet. They're coming from 60 miles away. They can drive back home at night. But also a shortage of facilities. So if you want to get into that market, which is another little niche, there may be more facilities going on. Swimming pool, maybe I haven't been in there, but that's kind of a year-round thing now. And of course, most places don't have several swimming pools. You do all the events at one time, or at least everybody's in the same place. But you might work on that one as well. To us, there's obvious local potential for investing. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go in terms of, not obvious. They're not jumping out and saying, this is the weakness side. I think they're there, but nobody's yelling at us and saying, I'm going to put money on the table. And when we ask that question, yeah, they're here, but nobody's saying, where can I put in 10 grand or where can I put in 100 grand to do this? So ideally, this planning process and the ultimate plan, we've heard this from you all, will make you feel more comfortable about that. Okay, how do we do that? Now that we got a plan for this community, especially downtown, I'm willing to put some bucks in there, not alone, but now I got a plan. Labor force is a weakness in the sense that it's not growing, as you just saw. It's also, at the current time, fully employed or more. It's a very low unemployment rate. So how do you grow a business when there's not enough workers? It's a chicken-egg thing. Get people to move here. Why? Get them, whatever that is. But right now, that's a weakness for that. And I think that I'm kind of sort of hearing you're relying a little too much on word of mouth. I may be saying that wrong. What I'd like to see, and you'll see it on my opportunity side, is a lot more focused and comprehensive public relations program to really bring a lot more here. Okay, while it's SWOT, S-W-O-T, opportunities ought to be third. Threats, I hate to leave people with threats in my last slide, so I'm going to move to threats right away. Kind of put everybody a little downer. But we'll finish with opportunities, and the list is pretty long. Trying to get it all on one slide. But you saw some of this graphic from Jim's stuff. This actually looks at not only Marceline, but also Lynn County and Charrette County. And since 1950, those are growth rates depicted. Everybody's losing population. Meanwhile, the state's growing. And then the 9 bordering counties around it, those two, there's 11 counties, they're shrinking, but not quite as severely. But Missouri's growing. Why aren't we getting our share here? Now, a lot of that share is certainly going to urban metropolitan areas. There's a tendency to do that, but it can be done. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about here in terms of threats. If that's going on, are those big forces that you really can't quite control, but you can manage around and find the niches where we can grow. So it's a bit of a threat that way. We're hearing, how do you get to Marceline? I mean, I thought, oh, you go 36. Whoa, wait a minute. It's still some miles below that when we're staying at the hotel right on 36 in Brookfield. Okay, you can shorten that distance or eliminate that perception with good marketing, good signage, and so forth. But right now, it's sort of a threat like, well, it's hard to get to, right? Yeah. By the way, I came up 24 and up 5, I guess, whatever all that is, which is a cool route to do, but it makes it feel like it's farther away. Oh, it was a gorgeous day on Sunday. had 4 beautiful days in a row here, huh? Chamber of Commerce, good for you. And like I say, unenthusiastic local investors, but that's an early thought. I'm sensing better of that now. Willingness is what we're going to talk about. Bit of complacency. You heard a little bit from Jim. What's that attitude? Hey, things are pretty good for many of us, especially those of us probably in this room in many ways. So why work hard for us? We got to be thinking the future and thinking about everybody in the community. And then you've got this challenge of Brookfield. I'm glad Jim said, I don't want to hear that again. So we're going to take it off the slide. But Highway 36 was one of my thoughts. I didn't put it up here, but say it out loud. All the way up to 36. There's a long way to go. And it's been a sore spot. So let's go. Marketing, all those together. There's like a planting or this thing with batch and star. And then great. I mean, they're always popping. And that should happen. The Midwest and the New York. Crazy things like us. So where should I go? I gotta go to. That's got to be worded. That's got to be a so you know, a lot of operations go on. That's always come out in the 4-point approach. In fact, in many ways, the cross tourism. I don't know how well you're doing that with all of Highway 36 things. It reads well. I hope that's going well. It should be a lot of that. By the way, that subline of genius is kind of cool. What I want to do is write down all the geniuses that are in the magazine, in the brochure. There maybe ought to be a summary of that. Who are those people without having to turn the pages? Because it is kind of neat. More museum visitors will also bring more foot traffic, more buying power. So you start shrinking that gap because outsiders, we all spend money outside of our communities. As Jim pointed out. Yeah, this is our buying power, what we buy, but we frequently buy stuff in other places. We go on trips to London, so we spend some of our money. Hopefully the Londoners will come back here and we'll balance that. Right now you're not quite at balance. You've got a gap, a negative gap, but the more tourists you get in here, museum otherwise, they can bring some of that money back in, new money back in. Almost like I said, priority one seems to be, if we're going to get this, we're going to get that, people living here, lodging, well, what are they going to eat? A nice place to eat, maybe 2 places. So priority one in many ways, I think we're all kind of sensing it. That's probably a key project to start working on within the confines of this master plan. I'd love to see, and I don't know, I didn't have much chance to explore it this given time. TuneFest, I think, is awesome of what I learned about it. And I'd love to see it grow into like a Sundance Film Festival sort of thing. I'm saying that wrong, but can you get more people here doing more things, and maybe some off TuneFest season events, bringing in artists and storytellers, and how you do that. I mean, that's all based around the Disney idea, entertainment producers, whatever. Is there a way to capture that and say we're a center of learning how to do that? To young people, to old people, to entrepreneurs. It might be kind of cool. I don't know if it can grow that way and you bring more people here. Event gathering expansions. We're hearing about weddings, family reunions. I love this alumni association thing. Who does that? I mean, but it's really cool. We talked about how you might be able to tap into that for some other housing things as well this morning. More of that going on. But when you say more of that, do we have space to do it? And do we have more people, where do they stay overnight? Downtown, again, I think you've got some great sites, both buildings and existing sites. Some of them vacant, some of them need to be cleared. And you're going to hear more about that in a minute here, probably. Bus tours, it's like land cruises to all these people we saw yesterday. We're on a bus tour over when we wandered through the museum. That's like a land cruise, right? You get all these people in there doing it. Got our tour guides. Kay was touring them around. Well, that's awesome. We talked this morning, why can't we get Amtrak to pull in here all the time, as it comes by, and sell it some way out in what I'm calling the Disney Depot. If you could call it that, I don't know if they'll let you do. But what, yeah, come here. Farmers Market, we hear more about that. I think we all talked about it earlier. getting people here more often, permanent facilities, but also programming of that space for lots of things. Even the lamplighter, if you squint your eyes, it's a kind of a cool setting. It may not have quite the theme that it ought to have, but there's a historic thing that could probably be built into that and expand its abilities in its own image. Packages for hunters and outdoor sportsmen, bring them here, and things like an RV park. So in the end, it ought to be. This is a place where RV people would come. Lots of opportunities for different kinds of overnight accommodations. I haven't put any real numbers to, I have started to, and you need to get to a break-even point. Where can that investment start? How might we subsidize early on some things to make sure that happens, to start capturing that market? But the opportunities really jump out at you, not the least of which is all the people in this room that make that happen.
All right, so we're going to shift gears a bit and get pretty heavy visual now. I know I've met some of you. My name's Andy. This is Randy. Go ahead and make the joke. It's Dandy. But if you really want one, you could do Jim, Bob, Andy, Randy, and then really chew on one. Anyway, quick context. Again, I know we've met with some of you, and you probably have a good understanding of what we're doing and what does design and planning mean. What this really means is these are some of the projects and improvements that can happen. Some of them can happen as you leave the door. Some of them may take 5, 10, 15 years. Everything that you'll see is feasible, and I like to always just kind of give you that disclaimer up front. In particular, the tasks that I looked at while we were here is my backdrop is urban design, planning, and landscape architecture, and in simplest form, that's all the stuff on the ground. It's all the stuff between the buildings. In particular, as you will relate to some of the things that you see, that's streetscape, parking, pedestrian walks, connections, parks, open space, and actually we did even take a site and go through some typicals, or like a scenario that is a redevelopment opportunity, which they're basically, well, I don't want to give it all away right now. Randy, on the other hand, has some architecturals and facade renderings, and he's going to share this with you, and he's really good at showing off, trust me. He's an architect. So, anyway, to the goods. Real quickly, for context, we're going to start up here at the Disney Home Barn and Dreamy Tree with some light touch stuff, and we're going to kind of build up and end in the down with some things around Ripley Park. But again, context, Disney Home, the Barn and Dreamy Tree are here. We're obviously down here in downtown. We've got a lot of emphasis on what we're going to share with you within that big orange block. Of course, we're kind of sitting right there on that corner. I can't really hold the laser pointer. That's still there. So, starting out on the Disney Tree and Dreamy Barn area, this is West Broadway. Route 5 is here. If you go out this way, there's this crazy little brown puppy that I think could literally jump over the moon. We addressed, I think a lot of what we heard from you all is complete agreement. I mean, this needs to feel really kind of as it is. I mean, one of the tags that I think I heard was, it's a working farm, and that's the way it should feel. I think we completely agree with, you keep the pull-off situation that's very subtle, doesn't encourage people to come up and start knocking on the door and saying, hey, where did he sit, where did he sleep? And then you move yourself down into this area where you can go and obviously experience the tree and the barn, which is fantastic. Just some minor things we can do there. I think, just picking up a few additional parking spaces, which we're showing here. I think there's roughly 3 to 4 out there. We've shown probably 10 to 12 niched in so that it's like if you're going out to an apple orchard. It's not paved, doesn't have concrete curb stops. You keep it real simple. Gravel materials, wood, things that are natural. Real simple stuff. The other thing that we touched on and we heard was, it does get a little wet in here. Might be an interesting way to collect and populate people at the end of that by doing a boardwalk structure. Incorporate signage with it, that kind of thing. What it does is it just gives you a punctuation point to say, hey, what else is back there aside from the discovery part itself? And with that, we move right into downtown. So the areas that I'm going to address in particular are Main Street. There's an opportunity, we feel, for a pocket park in the downtown, the old hospital site, and of course Ripley Park and everything that's around that, museum environments and the community center. sprinkled amongst that is a lot of Randy's, what is all of Randy's work as well. Starting out with Main Street. I think this is real simple stuff. For the most part, we feel like the infrastructure, the bones of it, the dimensional aspects are fine. You've got limited right of way. You don't need to start recreating the wheel, and obviously, given that the traffic that you have, then you do have to accommodate truck traffic. You don't want to get into things that are going to make it more complicated. However, there's some just simple cosmetic things that could come in and things that we can do to enhance it with not a lot of investment, a lot of time. You know, real basic, and it's a visual thing. We'd recommend painting the striping the full length of the spaces. It's
You know what we're talking about? The parking spaces?
the parking spaces they're painted kind of short. It's just a perception thing. And when people drive, they see that zone being wider, they'll slow down. Believe it or not, when the cars aren't there. If the whole downtown's parked, awesome. That's the ultimate goal anyway. We want a parking problem downtown. That means business to flourish.
Lanes are too short?
Yeah, the painted stripes of the
painted,
parking
they're
stripes are
about
18 feet long and they're about 9 to 10. And so it gives you the visual impression that you have a lot wider roadway to drive on, so it causes people to drive faster. Whereas if you saw the stripes coming on up to the driving lane, it would slow them down.
Well,
They're-
we're limited by MoDOT.
It's limited
We are. That's a MoDOT road.
to paint the
And we just painted them
Yes.
this year, but I understand the length, but we're subject to.
Is that their standard?
There's no way that can be their standard. No, I understand it's a road, but there's no way they would paint too short. It's just,
So,
I've
well,
been
we can,
painting before.
yeah, we can look, check into that, see what they're gonna be here next week.
Good, that'd be good.
Bring it up, definitely, please. Yeah. But again, and then we heard about, obviously there's truck traffic, and a lot of the things that we like to do in downtowns to get some greenery and trees in there and define the street is, we go through bump outs. I would say in this community, you do something that's sort of a half dimension. Many times you'll take it out full dimension of the parking. That can be a problem when you've got agricultural or truck traffic on it because they can cut those. So what we're showing here is something that's probably a half depth. It's only 6 feet. Typically they might go out as far as 12 feet. What that also does is shorten the pedestrian distance from one side of the street to the other, which obviously is more conducive to walking, it's safer, etc. The trees that are out there, or the tree pits that exist, I think they're great to keep them and try to maintain them. However, in certain areas they are kind of tripping hazards. You elevate those back up, you replace the trees. I don't think it's necessary to put consistent trees all through town. In a situation where you've got solid architecture in a tight 3-block area, you're going to let those buildings shine over time. And Randy will allude to this in his renderings, but we feel like the crosswalks could use a treatment that will also, convey that across. And then also by extending, there's a lot of parking actually on these side streets, just either head in or diagonal. That allows you to extend the curb and these little nodal areas on the corner to get a tree planter in, as well as create a little pocket of corner on the corners of a little pocket of planting on those corners where the intersections occur. And that's a nice way to get some color and pop in the downtown. And again, we're only talking about, in this piece, we did a typical from Gracia up to Ritchie, which is, the park is going to be like right here on the corner. Moving on to the pocket park space. This is, I'm sure you all are quite familiar with, but this is the theater building. This is the fence that's, I believe we're 1 block up from Gracia. No. Is that right? Okay. Behind there's a vacant lot, which happens to be this. So again, the theater then is on your left. This is a nice opportunity to give you something a little bit different than the park space that you have here. This park space is fantastic. It's a different feel, it's a different character. So what we've done is we've come up with a plan, and Randy and I have worked on several pocket parks throughout the U.S. And Kansas Street is at the top here, or I'm sorry, Main Street, Kansas Avenue. Alley's at the back. Interesting part about having the alley here is it gives you another way to animate a small space like this. For instance, you could pull a food truck in. You could set up a stage back here. It's nice to have that flexibility that you can program it in ways in many different occasions. The other part of that is you can create a backdrop by, this is a distance, I don't remember the exact dimension. It's to the back of the adjacent building, where you could put a structure that might be a roll-up garage door, has some sort of character that relates to the geography or some form of structure that you could then use as a backdrop for doing movies, movie nights, or you can project things on it, those kind of things. But then, to animate a little space like that, you introduce some shade, overhead lighting, which string lights work great. It's a minor investment. Container plantings, you introduce some benches, seating and tables. People can then, once you get restaurants and takeaway items, you can come in here and you can sit and relax, those kind of things. And there's always opportunities when you've got brick walls and party walls for doing wall murals and things like that. And just some quick imagery as teaser. These are all pocket park samples, tables, awnings, umbrellas. This is a real interesting way to address shade issue in a narrow street. That's, I've seen people, we've done one where they have used books. They called it Book Pocket Park, and they drop books down just for an overhead canopy, lighting, things like that. This is a real interesting park that I just came across in the last week or two that it's made out of pallets. They literally had a budget of, can't remember the number, but they scrounged up all of the materials to put this in over a 2-week period. And then they did some stenciling and they told a storyline on the ground plane. It's just an interesting idea. Again, introducing some greenery. Obviously with wall spaces, you can start to get that vegetation in there, sort of enlighten it, give it a little a little summer flair to it with some perennials. Again, wall murals, lighting, the food truck concept, and obviously giving it some animation at night. All right, so a little bit of a shift in gears. We mentioned, you heard some things about buildings, vacancies, and opportunities and things like that. This is the old hospital site. East Howell's on the top here. The alleyway that comes through on the west side is here. Gracia is here. That ramp that you kind of come off is sort of up here. There's a little bit of grade in through there that starts to kick up. Well, we don't have the answer for the building in its current state. That's a completely different thing. You could go through a building assessment, a building evaluation, brownfields, to figure out if it truly is a rehabable structure. What we can help you with, though, is we feel like there are 3 site opportunities for that site given 3 different conditions. And that's what we can guide you with. This one depiction is, if it's truly renovatable, you rehab the building into a use that's appropriate for it. It's a complete redo. You introduce some parking to the rear of it, which obviously supplies that building. You introduce some space to it, whether it's a courtyard or a lawn panel, something that gives it an amenity package that makes it attractive to investment, oriented towards, let's say it's a residential use, then you've got some activity that associates with that. That's one scenario. Second scenario would be, you keep a portion of the building. And this is depicting the front end of the building, which I believe is the oldest portion. Am I right? You keep that, which then opens up the other end of the site, which is Gracia, for a building that you can have that now fronts on Gracia, creates a signature address, and that site is then combined together and you have a shared parking resource that supplies the demand for those 2 structures. The last scenario is where you look at it and it's just not savable. It's now a development site. It goes out on the real estate market, and what can we do to attract that to development or into an investment? And in that case, then, we typically in a downtown, the things we want to encourage are, 1, you want to respect the building line on the street. We want to get that building as close as we can to the street. This is a mere reflection of the same scenario in the prior scheme, and then you tend to you bury the parking in behind the buildings, and that creates the tight-knit downtown that we want. It's walkable. If there are uses that are mixed use in there, even better. Okay, Ripley Park. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. We've been back and forth, and we actually landed on 2 schemes. And the long and short of it is, we think they're both really good. One is more of a shared, more of a cooperative effort between the museum, the city, and the community center, and working on some of the lands and so how the ownership lies today. The other, which is the one I'm going to walk through here first, is more respective of those ownership lines. They both work. They both have programming in them and opportunities for spaces that work really well together and start to animate and energize the space. I think the first thing that came out of my mouth when I was here to Randy, tongue-in-cheek, was I'm really worried about the back end of this park because typically when you have a big park space like that, it's all surrounded by buildings or things that give it activity and eyes. Well, lo and behold, by the end of Monday, I'm like, whoa, we've got activity and we've got environment back here based on all the things that we heard. This scheme, really what we're doing is the character of and the landscape that exists in that, which is sort of a classic park pattern, would pull itself all the way through the site. Then within that, the Hometown Museum would then use sort of that zone to start to bring out some of the park elements like the Midget Audiotopia, and that would actually just, it would happen sort of naturally within the park space. While it's still part of the museum, it happens in an environment that feels like it's all within the holistic piece. Part of that is, and then some other things that roll into the scheme are, one, we recommend removing the current bandstand and removing the current gazebo and then consolidate them into a larger, more multifunction sort of pavilion, in that what you can do is now use that as a focal point for events that could happen in this lawn area, they could happen here, they could happen in any of those panels. It just gives you a bigger venue that's consolidated together. You could have a concert facing, the backdrop of downtown. You could have a concert on this particular, or you could have a crowd facing that way. You could have a crowd facing this way, looking back across the pond, looking towards the museum. It's just a more flexible type of use. Obviously, the fountain is not going to be hidden under that. So what we talked about was, okay, we're taking the fountain out. One of the things that we understood is that, we've got a community center here. It's got a lot of bodies in it. It's got a lot of kids, hopefully, in it. We need to have some recreation activity down there that associates with them. We replaced the fountain with a new splash pad piece, which obviously works very well with, you've got water where you've got water. And we create a zone down here that is really sort of heavily animated towards kids, families, those kind of things. That red building right there, that represents the possible location for the new concession stand and bathrooms. What we really like about getting it down here is that it starts to anchor the community center with more activity. It creates an edge, and then it also starts to frame that space back to the pond. Introducing the playground that is now framed by the locomotive, and you've got a splash pad, so you've got all that activity building up here. And then lo and behold, right next door is the Hometown Museum, which is now strongly connected through a walkway here. There are a lot of pragmatic details in here that I know we talked about with several people, and we talked about this over there. They're all there, but I know you want to go home before Friday. So when you see this plan again, there will be notes all over it, and probably a key plan, things like walkway dimensions, and we're showing some improvements of corners that have possible gateway features, all kinds of things, and again, they're feasible. They don't have to happen overnight.
And at least mention the farmer's market gesture and unless you're going to do it.
Yeah, that's coming up. The one thing that I did not mention, which is obviously a biggie, there's a basketball court here. We really feel strongly it's not in the right place. But we can relocate it, or we can remove it altogether. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute. All right, Scheme B. Scheme B creates a real definitive promenade space along the bottom of where people are using as a roadway today. We know it's not a road, but it's getting used that way. It would be accessible by vehicles, but the priority is for pedestrians. So, it could literally be bollarded off, but the point would be that you've created an edge down here that has these things that feed off of it, which I'm going to go into here in a second, and connects the Hometown Museum back to the community center, and in a place that's, it's a plaza. It feels like a plaza, but it's not overly that wide. I think this is literally 12 to 14 feet, so it's a really wide walkway. This would keep the fountain in place. It needs to be restored, renovated, or replaced. We know that. Keeps the gazebo where it is. The only movement that we've made in terms of the structures in the park is to take the bandstand and go for a new bandstand here. Reason being, I think one of the challenges that I have with bandstands are if they're not being performed in, they're just sitting. What we'd like to see here is a new structure or pavilion that's sort of transparent on both sides, while it can be used as a bandstand for having a concert or performance where you've got people populating here, looking back towards the bandstand over the pond into the museum. On days and times when there aren't performances in there, it could be used as a place to sit and be looking out over the pond or looking back as kids run around doing whatever they're doing, the kids do, or if you want to just sit there and wait for the 50-pound catfish to come up and say hello, you've got a place to do that.
And backdrops for weddings.
Yep. Again, playground space, ideal location again for the concessions for all the same reasons I just gave you in the prior scheme. The different part of this, and this is where there's a little bit more pollination between city, museum, and the community center, is the things that happen along here that are very important to the vitality and the energy are, you heard the notion of a farmer's market. We feel like these visual cues down California and Ritchie are pretty strong and pretty prominent. And personally, I'd rather not be looking at trains all day long. We know they're there. But if we could get something that is vertical, that has architectural substance to it, it doesn't have to be a solid building. In fact, these are not solid buildings. We would like to do that. More importantly, that is now a house that you can put a farmer's market in. You create it in a situation where you put bays in it, and the vendors can pull in. Obviously, you can drop the bollards. All of that can start to happen there. In the center, then, is what we've designated for now is it's museum display. That's where Midget Autotopia, whatever goes in there. That's sort of, if not, the hometown museum garden, if you will, even. Again, making that same gesture here, perhaps pulling the train piece out so that it's aligned on the center line of the street. And then the bells and whistles of, you've got some plaza space. All of these hatched lines that you see represent plaza or pedestrian space. It's not street. These would be your streets, obviously.
Maybe on the previous one, talk about the street in front of, up to the museum.
Oh, that's coming.
Okay, it's coming. All right. Sorry.
They've got me. They're keeping me in check. Now, some things that go hand in hand with either of those plans, with the community center and museum, which is literally what Randy and what I've been reminded on. Apparently, they didn't look at my slideshow. Existing community center is here. In either of the schemes that I just showed you, this is what can happen. We've got a demand, we know, for a lot of people that are coming in and out of here. That also may have a longer-term demand that it needs to expand. With that comes what? Parking. There's a lot of land out here with just general site layout. Asphalt obviously helps because once you put stripes down, then people feel like, now I know where to go. You put them in a gravel lot, who knows how they'll park. But you start to lay out that parking lot, you introduce some tree planting islands to give it a little bit more softened environment. That's a lot of space to start to accommodate some of the things, and more importantly, get people from their cars back to all this activity that's now happening down here. There's literally 125 to 135 parking spaces in there. One of the offshoots of that is, as an alternative location to the farmer's market building, is we've worked on several downtowns, and unfortunately I did not pull out an image, where this black line represents what is essentially it's a structure that you can park under that then can be programmed for a farmer's market. So it's like a giant open air shed, if you will. During the week you park under it, and then when it's farmer's market day, it's no parking and the vendors pull in there. That's a pretty good sized building. It could be any size. It's based on the demand of how many farmers and as the farmer's market grows. As the farmer's market would grow, then you can start to talk about moving vendors out on the street, perhaps down, if it's a promenade scheme on the park, that kind of thing. And then, I mentioned the basketball. There's plenty of room back here. Now, we've gone with the assumption it's not a full court. If we need to incorporate a basketball, a half-court situation, that can absolutely work in there. And then moving to the museum, I apologize. I realized this literally about 15 minutes before we loaded this up that I cropped off a section of this plan, but this is the hometown museum site. The silos are here. The pond is here. The street is apparently no named, but the gesture on this street, we feel like, needs to be something that is more conducive to people, not cars. Granted, it is a street in which you can drive on. Obviously, you've got offload grain, you've got 18-wheelers coming here, but it gets treated in something that may not be asphalt. It's got special paving to it, something that just really starts to say, this is the carpeted front door for something special here and something special happening back here. There's ample space for the museum to expand over time. We've reflected a plaza area that could be, again, display space. Could be something that could be animated. You know, we heard about people who like to just come and sit and look at the trains. Great. I hope they have their ibuprofen. Again, just that termination and that center line element. You know, I believe we talked about the possible train piece sitting at the end there. More pragmatically and functional, getting some more parking. This is a tough diagram. I might have to fix this up a little bit, but these small rectangles, while being in specially paved area, also represent some head-in parking. I realize there's an existing rail line here, but it's actually a really cool little detail that kind of harkens to the old. You fill in between the rail lines and you can just park over it, and you delineate it with blocks at the front. But all said that, I'm told, I think we picked up, you know, 19 to 20 parking spaces, which directly to the museum is good, because you've got people now that may be ADA assisted, whatever, we can incorporate this ADA spots. And then just some real quick teaser images for the park. I'm not saying these are, you know, you've got to build this now, but, you know, the notion of anchoring corners, we talked about that. That's one of the strongest things you can do. I'll tell you what I really like about this. You only have to do 2 corners. In many instances, it's 4. I apologize for the snow, but I like snow. So, you know, another layer in terms of some of the focal points in the park, the gazebos, like, you know, the notion of a splash pad I mentioned earlier. And, you know, splash pads, I think we've worked on a few. I like to keep them simple, particularly in urban areas. They're lower maintenance. They can be lower cost, but you can do things at night that are pretty attractive. Lighting and things like that. It's not complicated. And, you know, just obviously the event space, looking at seating out in the park, you know, you do have to worry about these things walking away, but putting some different types of seating in the park to attract people, particularly with color, is always successful. And, you know, that when I showed you that larger pavilion, if you get into a scale like that, that starts to give you a lot more flexible use for certain events in the park, and, you know, again, just an image on piers and things like that.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Randy Wilson with Community Design Solutions out of Columbia, South Carolina, instead of Missouri. And I also have the privilege of serving as our state's Main Street architect. Since you've been patient and listening to us for a long time, I want you to speak so that you can define this slide. This is a real fancy definition of the Main Street approach to design, but you're smart enough to know what it means. So this is what I want you to do. I want everybody in the room to look at somebody near you at your table, look them straight in the eyes and repeat after me. Find somebody to look at. You ready? I'm so glad. No. Let's make this a lot more enthusiastic. Right in the eye, loudly and proudly. I'm so glad. You don't look like me. What you've just done is define the Main Street approach to design. Because I'm so glad that downtown Marceline doesn't look like any other place on the planet. You know, there are a lot of places that we boast about that we say we're envious of a town nearby that shall remain nameless. But there are a whole lot of things there that I can find in all across America. But this is the only place on the planet where I can find this precise assemblage of historic and authentic buildings. And that is, to Jim's point earlier on, why we want to take such great care in preserving and maintaining them. And my section has to do with how we treat those buildings to support some of the planning initiatives Andy talked about, so that we can then house them with the opportunities that the guys talked about from a retail and a marketing strategy point of view. I'm going to quickly review 2 things that I mentioned the last time I was here, only because we spoke to a much smaller audience that primarily consisted of the steering committee. I want to make sure everyone has the privilege to hear it, because all of the recommendations build on what we said before. The first was, and really there needs to be another word here, and it ought to say temporary. And it's the most important word, because what I want to try to help you do is to buy some time until you can make some more substantive investments in your buildings. And so some of the things you can do to buy time until you can fix them up is just do vacant building treatments, but they're temporary. These should not be there for long. It's just to buy time until the buildings are filled. What we're trying to do is stem that tide of perception. If people come into town and see 1 or 2 buildings vacant, not a problem. If they see a lot vacant, it is a problem because of perception. This can kind of take the edge off of that. Obviously, one of the things we can do is put art in the windows. Sometimes you can literally create a pop-up art gallery with some of the artists if you can gain access to one of the buildings. You can sometimes simply print nostalgic photographs on butcher paper and put them in the wall. And y'all got plenty of those kind of photographs in your community. Here, you're so drawn to the imagery, you don't even realize the building is vacant. This is a similar treatment, only that they portray panels that speak to specific people, events, and sites, historic events in this town. In this case, it's Barre, Vermont. In this instance, this was actually an occupied building that occupied a pharmaceutical company that made and packaged drugs, and therefore they couldn't have visibility into the business. But the problem is it gave the impression of being a dead, vacant building. And so the solution there was just simply wrap those vinyl clings like you see on cars on the outside of the property, again featuring, in this case, some of those historic, colorful postcards. And then finally, using 11 by 17 formatted posters that you can print off of your own home computer. These are sort of community pride building campaigns. This is a town in my state, Conway, South Carolina, where we interviewed, in one instance, Richard, like the city manager, and others, local businesses. And we just simply asked them, why do I love this place? Why do I live here? Why do I work this place? And it had the side benefit of not only kind of educating you about the people that you went to church with, that you saw every day in the grocery store. You're so interested in reading about your other friends and neighbors, you don't even notice the fact that this building is vacant. And so you kind of get a double win out of that. The second recommendation I made last time was, we've heard a lot about facade grants, and we certainly want to incentivize, to the degree possible, enhancements and improvements to our buildings. But what is the 6,000-pound gorilla in the room? All that takes money. And so one of the strategies that I've employed in other places is, rather than trying to fund an overall building grant for the entire facade, is to simply take one element or one component of a typical facade renovation and only fund that one thing per year. For example, if you think of a normal building, it is comprised of signs and paints and awnings and slip covers and windows and doors and lights. All of those things added together give you an overall facade renovation. And in this strategy, what you do is you say, in 2017, the only thing that we're going to fund are awnings. In 2018, we're going to only fund signs. And here's the benefits, and I'm going to be fair and tell you the drawbacks as well. The benefits of this is it allows a smaller pot of money to go farther, because let's just use signs by way of example. A typical panel sign for a building of this size is probably going to run you, depending on the material, between $500 and $750. So if you even could only cobble together $5,000 for a facade component grant in a matching situation, now you can probably put between 10, 15, 20 new signs in your downtown. And so the added benefit is more people get to play at one time, instead of only having if you only had $5,000 at most, if you were doing an overall building, maybe one, at the most two. So instead of only allowing 2 people to play in the sandbox, let's allow 15 or 20 to play. The drawback is obvious. It will take us longer to accomplish this, but that's okay, because if you're engaging more people in the process, it's probably going to take the pressure off of having to make everybody happy at the same time. And the last thing I really like about it is, I'm just going to be really honest with you, a lot of property owners, certainly not Gary, but some property owners, they're intimidated by the notion of, what would I even do if I was to do my entire facade? Everybody can simply ask and answer the question, do I need a new awning or not? Do I need a new sign or not? And just simplifies the process for the administrator, the owner, and everyone else. So in Beaufort, South Carolina, they just did an awning grant one year. In Hartsville right now, they're doing a sign. And what they found, if they offer somebody $500 towards their sign, they're getting much better quality signs as a result. If they were funding it solely out of their own pocket, you just kind of get mundane signs. But now they're seeing far more creative signs. You can even fund, in this case in Searcy, Arkansas, rears of buildings. And this is probably my favorite story. If you'll indulge 2 minutes, it's worth it. So to my point before, I think oftentimes we see that building and we make an assumption about the owner. And what is our assumption? They don't care. That was actually and ironically not the case here. The gentleman, pretty elderly in life, bought this furniture store, and the reason he didn't remove the slipcover and fix it up is just he was just scared. He didn't know how hard it would be, nor what it would look like once he pulled it off. And it was one of those wonderful moments, Gary, when I went up in the second floor and I saw all of the windows and everything were there. So I prepared a rendering of how I thought it would look, and he was so excited he actually did the work. Now here's the best part of the story, or as Paul Harvey would say, and now for the rest of the story. This whole component approach to the facades, now this was about 15, 20 years ago. At that time, it only took us a little less than $1,000 to remove and dispose that slipcover. And so the city, in their wisdom, offered a one-time component grant for slipcover removal up to $1,000. And as a result, 5 of the remaining 6 buildings in downtown removed their slipcovers. But the benefit was 5 of those buildings were contiguous. And so you can see this building is this building, that building is the corner here. Those 3 in that picture were those 3. And when all of those slipcovers came over, look at the transformation between here and here. To me, that was a very astute investment of $5,000 on the part of that city. And so now let's turn our attention to downtown Marceline. And we're going to start with one of Gary's buildings because I know you share my sentiment that I applaud your effort in purchasing and saving and working to maintain some of these buildings. And this is one of his buildings, and I wanted to use this building to illustrate the whole component facade grant approach to enhancements. So let's just pretend for fun and giggles next year you could offer a storefront grant that would provide some matching funds up to a limit to help Gary. And so let's just pretend we drop a new storefront here. So it's already better. Now we understand there's more to be done, but could we get by? Yes, we could, because these windows have been blocked up, they can remain blocked up, but we can go ahead and activate and occupy the first floor. In the second phase, he takes advantage of a signage grant. Something goes up on the top and maybe some vinyl signage on the windows. In the third, perhaps then he replaces these windows. In the fourth, perhaps he puts up an awning or a canopy of some configuration. Yet it took a while, but the benefit is not only did Gary benefit from this investment, other property owners did, and you helped incentivize his process. So if we go, oh, I forgot about lights. So you could even offer a light. So again, pretend 5 years from now, this is what we're looking at today. Hopefully we'll like what you saw just before. But you could go from here to here over time and be gradual. Do you like before or after better? Okay.
After.
So this is the building right beside it. And of course, what you heard from these guys is, what is your most necessary use downtown? Restaurants. And so this building already has sort of that sort of Spanish flavor. And so we would strongly encourage, if possible, try to recruit a Mexican restaurant here. And so that's how that's illustrated. Just a really quick, I'm a part-time pastor, so here's a really quick sermonette. If you can avoid painting buildings white, historically, the only buildings that were painted white were churches, civic buildings, and residential, okay? But not downtown buildings. And the reason is because it's such a glaring color, in a harsh sun. And so by virtue of tanning it, subtly a tan with a little bit of yellow, you've introduced this triadic color between the green, the red, and the yellow. And it's just a lot more harmonious and easy on the eye. So this is kind of across the street. This is the property that Mr. Morales just bought. And you can see the bones of this building has this exquisite cast iron coping, cornice work. And what we want to do is kind of revert the parts that have been inappropriately infilled to take it back more towards its historic origins. And so we're going to start in phase 1 with just taking this building back closer to the way it was before, removing the brick, inserting the storefront, and then removing the siding and going back to the way that the windows probably would have been. It probably were either 2 or 3 windows in this configuration. But we also have this really wonderful space, this alley kind of drive-through that's an opportunity, especially depending on how the hospital site beyond develops. And so again, this becomes a really great opportunity to actually do placemaking and create a place out of this.
Again, with a minimal investment of the string lights, you kind of create that implied ceiling. In the daytime and at nighttime, a really gentle cast of light below. I know, and by the way, I couldn't precisely do, I know that there's a mural that's in the works that featured and trust me, in the shade, you can actually see a bicyclist. But just something colorful to lure the eye and therefore the person into the space. And then again, depending on uses, whether there was a coffee shop, I think, yeah, there's a coffee shop nearby as well as an ice cream shop. You know, all of a sudden you create these areas that you could actually dine, and of course you can still maintain the vehicular access to and through the space. Right beside it, of course, if we go back, you know, here's the NOMA building. Now I'm going to take a completely different approach for this one, okay? So you need to prepare yourself. So in this instance, instead of removing the metal to kind of make it look historic, what's the problem with that with this building? Well, the building underneath was not historic either. In other words, that building has been replaced and fixed up so many different times that just removing this is probably not going to unveil any sort of detailed architectural character. Moreover, I understand why this paint color was selected. It was actually a very, very thoughtful idea, is to paint the metal the color of the adjacent brick, and therefore, which again, that's a strategy I employ all the time. But the ironic unintended consequence in this case is where when you're down the street, you look, at first blush, you think this is a brick building. But when you get closer, you realize it's metal. And so this is one of those rare instances that I'm going to take the complete opposite approach. Instead of trying to make it look old, because of its character and its materials, I'm actually going to make it look more contemporary. And the other reason why we can push the envelope in that direction in this particular case, you always have to look at the individual circumstances, is it houses an art gallery. And so the time period that I like whenever I'm faced with a metal building is to go back to almost that Art Deco period. And so that's why I've chosen this scheme and this approach here to make the building actually look a bit more contemporary and reflective of the use inside, using this kind of quintessential Art Deco palette of the burgundy, the charcoal grays, and then the lighter grays. I know this is an acquired taste, and if you don't like it, you will not hurt my feelings whatsoever. But all the artists in the room are going, yes, I love that. Okay. So this was the streetscaping gestures that Andy talked about a while ago. I thought I'd illustrate them visually because I know Chris and Michael and I had a really good conversation one day. The first question was, you know, what should we do about this sidewalk texture? And you need to know, we actually very much like the sidewalk texture and color. And we actually like the fact that it's starting to get this sort of mottled look. It's not too perfect. If it needs to be restained, that's fine. But some things that we think need to happen is that the actual, curve itself probably should be the contrasting color just from a safety and a visual point of view. The most important thing is who is our downtown for? Is it for the pedestrian or the automobile?
Pedestrian.
Right. It's for the pedestrian, and therefore we want to give as many visual clues that it belongs to the pedestrian. And so when you stand on the sidewalk, you have this red area that you know that the pedestrian is supposed to walk on, and then over here you have the red area that you know the pedestrian is supposed to walk on. But what's the problem? We've allowed the gray of the roadway to intersect it, and so the visual clue is all of that belongs to the car. And we want to say the entire opposite message. And so the first iteration is real simple. It's just simply take the exact same methodology you use for your sidewalks and apply that in your crosswalks. Because now we've flipped that, we've said all of this area belongs to the pedestrian, and automobile, here's your visual clue that you are actually driving in the area that belongs to the pedestrians. And therefore we're going to promote pedestrian safety. I mean, I'd love to see pavers and stamped asphalt like you have here, but the problem is with your snow plows, you're probably better suited to just simply stain the asphalt as it exists. Now, layered up number two, remember Andy pointed to all of those areas, at all of your corners, you have these dead areas. You understand what I mean? So here's the parking space right here, but you understand you can't park a car in this little triangle right there. Similarly, over here, here's the last stripe of the parking area, so you have another dead zone. And then
so that this is that little area he was talking about. If you take the edge of that planter and the edge of that space and you simply do a little bit out here, you create all of those opportunities to put landscaping in areas that you can't park at, and so you might as well give it back to landscaping color. And so here's what that implication will look like. And again, all of a sudden, downtown's really starting to pop with these just little pockets of color. And again, I understand maintenance is an issue, but I'm looking around this room and I know there's got to be some green thumbs in this room, you know, who can help take care of these plants and plant materials. Now, the final thing, and Andy said it right, and I want to reemphasize it, is we always want to show this in implementable phases. In other words, these can happen independent of each other. If you can do it all at once, great, knock yourself out. But we respect the fact that probably due to budget and emphasis, you may have to do this first. You may have to wait a while. Eventually, you can do this, wait out. But ultimately, we also want to infuse this streetscape with significant shade trees. So don't freak out because we're literally going to look 20, 25 years into the future. But if we can plant those trees in those tree wells, then long term, you're going to entirely change the canopy of your downtown. And y'all are probably good horticulturists, but do y'all know what the best time is to plant a tree? 50 years ago. That's right. So again, just to go all the way back, here's your existing conditions, and when we come back 25 years from now, that's what we get to see.
This also slows down the traffic, creating a canopy.
Thank you, Richard. He's exactly right. You know, the best way to slow down traffic is not to post a sign with a number on it. The best way to slow down is to increase interest and things in the visual cone of field as you're driving. And you're exactly right, Richard. That would also calm and slow down the traffic. So now we're going to move down to that same corner where we were. And of course, this is the old Allen Hotel. And Gary and I talked about a lot of variety of things, both in terms of maintenance. And so I wanted to show you, Gary, if the demand is shown through Bob and Jim's research that it can support a hotel, what might it look like if it reverted back? But the nice thing is, all you have to do to even use it in another capacity as a non-hotel is just remove the sign I'm going to show you, and it would still function for retail space on the first floor, apartments, or extended stay rentals on the second floor. So I just did some really subtle things. I didn't do a lot. You know, here on this corner at 45 degrees is a green neon sign that says Allen Hotel. And the purpose of that is, in case you didn't know, I only learned it this trip as well, is the actual lobby to the hotel is actually on the other side, facing the park. But we want to give visibility to the signage from both directions. So if it's not going to be a hotel, just remove that and it still works. I would encourage you, Gary, if you're willing. It's a very subtle thing, but instead of the pale blue and the red, I would do a warmer color, and in this instance, I would select kind of a deep Kelly green and then a kind of a burnt orange, and because that would work with. I'd love to see you at some point replace. Pardon me, I went too far. Remove this metal and go back with true traditional storefront insertions. And so what I've tried to imply is just you have this cast iron pilaster here. I'm hoping that those are still underneath the slip cover, and you could expose them. And then inside of it, I'm fine just framing it up with wood or a cementitious material like hardy plank or hardy board. But again, you can see if you painted those this sort of dark bronze brown as well as the green, at least from my way of thinking, it causes the building to look warmer and a little bit more historic. It could just be my opinion, but it seems that way to me. Last but not least is the building we're sitting in here now. And I really appreciated Jim's observation. You know, we keep talking about other buildings where we have to do major renovations to make them move-in ready for businesses. This one's obviously ready right now because we're using it. And so if your most pressing need is a restaurant, then perhaps this use, in other words, the smaller community gathering space, is temporarily housed in the Spanish building, and you go ahead and convert this to a restaurant. And then when you get a restaurant demand for that, then you move this use to another location, just so you're always responding to the highest and best use and need of your market. And so this would be the conversion if this would become kind of a corner restaurant. And to me, what really gets me excited about this one is this. You know, yes, it's great to have this restaurant use, which starts to address and meet your market demand. But an outdoor dining opportunity does a ton of good things for you. Number one, it just infuses the outdoors with vitality and animates the space. It's like something's happening downtown. And given the fact that you're facing this awesome park resource and asset, that to me is a no-brainer. Matter of fact, Richard, if I'm in your shoes and I had some money to cobble together for a component grant, I would help Gary and this restaurant pay for these yellow umbrellas just because it just makes the outside environment pop. Which leads me to my last point. And I'm going to sound like I contradict myself, but I promise I'm not. I am all about spending the least amount of money to gain the biggest impact. And so even though I've just told you that if you were to offer incentives to fix up your buildings to offer them as components as opposed to the overall, there's actually another type of incentive I would encourage you to promote even before those. Because again, you could spend even less money, but I think you would make even greater visual impact in the short term, that's the real important phrase, than either slightly more costly building rehabs or especially more costly streetscape and park renovations. And it's what I call vibrancy or amenity grants. Now, if you hang around in Main Street circles, the catchphrase they would say are lighter, quicker, cheaper placemaking gimmicks. We're saying the same thing. I just like my language better. Sorry, it's just a political statement. But these are the kinds of things that you do, is just like you offer to the building owner a partial reimbursement to a limit for an awning or a sign or a door or a can of paint. You're going to do the same thing for elements that infuse the outdoor with activity, color, and vibrancy. Whether it's colorful Adirondack chairs, benches. By the way, editorial comment. If you create opportunities to watch the park and to watch the train out there, do me a favor. Put swings instead of benches. Swings. I mean, wouldn't you rather sit in a swing instead of sitting on the bench?
We're talking about adult swings.
Yeah, so anyway, all right. Flags and banners, flowers, umbrellas, bistro tables, just anything to create these opportunities. And the reason is you spend less money, but you get more visual impact. And what we want to do is promote downtown stickiness, this notion that when you go downtown, there's stuff to do, especially for people of all ages. And so you've seen some of this imagery from some of Andy's work. This is a project that the town I'm working in just did. I see Gabe in the back room. Gabe, so the student art classes, we each given them the materials like 4x8, plywood, and various things, and they created these portable golf holes. And nine of them, and it's something sprinkled down the downtown, put it all together so you have a golf course. And so it's a really cool gimmick that just sort of leads people to the downtown. Again, there's no substitute for color and shaders. I just completed a park on this town city, and we populated these. Of course, the western people look at us, guess what single one is left. Because the communities, at least that's get one there and side, and they take and they don't go away. But if you're fearful, put a fake video camera, okay? We always hear us in terms of the horizontal surface or the vertical surface. Think about metals on the side cells. Interactive art. This lady's a neighbor of mine. She created this interactive art out of welded together two halves of propane tanks in various sizes. You sit down and you play them, and it creates this interesting tune. And of course, this is a really easy gimmick that a lot of times do. Before I die, I want to, or my wish is just anything to get people talking. I mean, Kay, to me, this is just, it's begging for, whether it's out there or in the museum, when Walt was dreaming and imagining, let's create opportunities for people to dream and imagine as they visit your downtown as well. And of course, these are no-brainers. Ripley Park ought to be filled with interactive games, whether it's cornhole or bocce ball or what was the other one? Giant Jenga is one of my favorites. This one's really cool. Just give the people, and especially your students, things to do when they're walking to and through the park. There's a really good case study. Norfolk, Virginia has done an exceptional one. The only problem is they got a lot of money, but if you want to at least look at their documents, it would be a helpful start. So that concludes my part of the presentation. I'll turn it over to Gayla to wrap us up.
great, right? As we said, it's the seeds. We're going to continue to work on plans. We're going to master these plans. You guys are going to get even greater information as we continue this process. But yes, Andy recorded all this, so you guys are going to be able to show it to your family, friends. The next thing that happens, we're bringing in a branding person that is going to help us work on the branding and the marketing of Marceline. So that happens in just a couple of weeks. And then after that, we will come back and meet with the city. We'll meet with the steering committee, and we're going to meet with the board, and we're going to begin to refine, make for sure that everything that we have in the plan is acceptable to you all, kind of walk you through how we think we can layer or lasagna, different things to make them happen, where we can pull monies, where grants we can apply for. It'll be really good to sit with the city to know what you guys are already applying for, if we capped out that grant, or have we not even scratched the surface on this one. So this is where, we're going to start to see the growth. And so that's exciting. Then Keith and I have a lot of work to do, because this isn't, you guys, I've told you guys this from the very, very beginning. This isn't a plan we want to set on a shelf. There's too many people that have been involved. You guys have given too many hours. There's too many pockets of money that is put into Marceline to make this plan come together. Now we need to make for sure that we do the plan. So Keith and I have a lot of work to do to know where those finances could come, who we can make that lasagna with, and then we're going to come back and make the final presentation with the team. At that time, we really hope that there's a large volume of people here with questions, and how do I get involved? Can I be on a committee, etc. And then, like I said, we're a family. We're not going away. So after we deliver that final plan, then we are going to start rolling our sleeves up and going, okay, we're going to roll out an action plan to make this happen. So that's what it looks like. It's getting exciting. It gives me goosebumps. It really does. So now we would love to take any questions for the team.